Welcome to the Local Pundit. I'm Josh Anthony. Today, we have a very talented guest on our show. He began his career in 1989 in Liverpool as both a news and sports reporter and became the deputy editor of the Liverpool Daily Post before leaving in 1999 for the Independent, where he worked for 18 years. Currently, he has a sports column in the DailyMail, which I love to read. I actually read his piece yesterday on Everton, which was great. Check it out. But not only is he a journalist, he's a prolific author as well. In 2018, he wrote Quiet Genius, Bob Paisley's British football's greatest managers. We can debate that. I think Alex Ferguson, but that's my thing. And most recently, his new book entitled Tinseltown, Hollywood and the Beautiful Game, a match made in Wrexham. The Local Pundit welcomes Mr. IAN HERBERT.
Hi, Josh. Great to be on. Thanks.
Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day, and just excited to have a chat and talk about football and talk about your work. I like to kick this off with an origin story about yourself and how you got started and where you're from, and who you support, obviously, and go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I belong in that kind of my sort of origins really are in that sort of era of journalism where you kind of wrote something for newspapers and then it wasn't read until the next day. There was no digital, and that made it easier and in some ways sweeter, because you actually had a day to write. So. I sort of started out, working in weekly papers in my part of the UK, which is kind of on the border of England and Wales, the north of Wales, quite close to Wrexham, writing sports reports for a local weekly paper. And then, as you said in that very kind intro, worked for the Daily Post, which served Liverpool and North Wales, which was one of the great British regional papers. In the days before a lot of the money was stripped out of them. And I spent 10 years there, worked for the Independent, which some viewers might know as a great liberal progressive paper, which challenged, which was a disruptor in some ways. It challenged the sort of, kind of established landscape of British newspaper publishing over and over again, continually reinventing itself, going into a tabloid format. And it's still there in a digital format. And then I went to work when that folded. Since then I worked for the Daily Mail. So I think I've seen a lot of the changing face of media in the last 30 years, and I'm feeling very old just describing this to you, Josh.
Right. Hey, it comes with age. We could grow and learn new things. And actually, as a matter of fact, I was doing research and I knew we were going to talk. And I actually read your first piece. I think it was your first piece on Hillsborough, September 13th, 2012. After a 13-year wait, the real horrible story emerges at last. That kind of struck me.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, it was a good piece.
Yeah, quite a lot of the stuff that I've written for the national papers has been at that kind of interface between news and sport. And I suppose I wrote a lot on Hillsborough over a long time because I started in Liverpool just a few months after the Hillsborough disaster, which I'm sure your listeners will very much be aware of as kind of the worst, English football disaster that we've known, and with a terrible cover up to boot. So, and then 2012 was a kind of a reckoning when, finally after sort of decades, there was justice for the families, of those whose lives were lost. So Hillsborough has been such a painful story, but for me, such an important one to write about. I certainly wasn't the leader in that respect. There are some other, great writers, David Conn of The Guardian, who I must mention, who you guys should check out. A great journalist and truth finder. But certainly, it was important to write about that.
Mm-hmm. It's very, you talk about like working for the Mail and the Independent, like challenging. And I read a bunch of pieces. And like I said, even I read the one yesterday at Everton, which was great. And there's a really great cadence to your writing, which is very grounded, but also like not pushing the envelope away, like the challenge. But it's like, okay, even the piece with yesterday about the owners with Everton, it's like, okay, there's a business behind this, but the football club is, belongs to the fans, and they want to sell insurance for some of the things like that. There's always been this, and this is coming from the U.S. There's always been this like battle between the football and journalism. Is that true to fact? And I like the fact that you said the Independent was challenging things. So is that still, you think, present today?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely present today. I think in terms of trying to challenge, the power bases in football, I think the real difficulty, Josh, has been that the actual clubs are so powerful, staffed with so many people, staffed with big comms departments, and the communications operation at these clubs is far bigger than than the actual journalistic operations at many papers. And the clubs hold a power which is really access to players, access to team, and readers of digital and printed kind of news sites, if you like, news outlets, if you like. They want to read about the players, the centre forward, the number 7, the keeper, the win last week, the defeat, and access. The clubs are the gatekeepers in many ways to that. I mean, you do have situations in the UK where journalists are banned from grounds. I mean, my paper is currently banned from Sheffield Wednesday because of reporting about the safety of Hillsborough, ironically. So, and that's the ultimate power that a club can hold, which will say, if you write bad stuff about us, we will kind of refuse you access. And for the local papers in particular, where they're so dependent upon the football clubs, the relationships with the football clubs, it's become very hard for them to challenge in the same way that they perhaps might used to have done.
Mm-hmm. And I think that goes with, again, we'll get to Wrexham a little later on, like what it means for the outlet to like show everyone, hey, look at our club, look what we're doing. It means something to the community. And to the bigger clubs, you look at like a Manchester City or even like a Manchester United, they're just they're a train wreck, like it's an absolute train wreck. And some of the reporting, I'm like, okay, there's got to be some truth, to the leaks that are going on. But I started doing this. I mean, I've been following football for the last almost 20 years now, but I started doing this because I love the idea, like watching what Wrexham has done, helping the community out. And we work with Sheffield FC, which, the first football club ever. And I love what's going on there. And, I'd love to see, so to get your opinion on like what it means to like actually, support the club as a community, as a small, you said you almost close to Wrexham. What's that like?
Yeah, I mean, unreal, really. Just brilliant. I mean, just slightly almost undefinable. I think that what's really, really, really cool about being a supporter of a smaller club, a small town club, if you like, is that whenever you have a particularly memorable win in the FA Cup or like even promotion for Wrexham last season, you get text messages from people who you've not heard of for 10 years, or because they associate you with that town, really. So that's really cool. And I mean, what's been quite interesting about Wrexham in the last couple of years, since Rob and Ryan have been part of the picture, has just been the way that without them sort of showering money all over the town, which has not been their way. It's been a more subtle kind of altruism, I think, and philanthropy, I should say. It just puts a spring in people's step. Even people who don't really follow the football that much, suddenly, the town is associated with something positive, and people are talking about it, and people are visiting, and there's a sort of a kind of an indefinable but absolute link between town and club, and identity is a big part of it, really. And I think football clubs do provide an identity for sort of slightly out of the way places like my town that otherwise would be struggling for an identity, perhaps in some way.
And when you're getting into journalism, is that something you always wanted to do? Is it from the sport that you love, or was it something organic? Was that something you always wanted to?
Yeah, I think it was something. It started out really because I really loved football as a kid, and I was really interested. I was really interested in commentating and commentators, and I used to commentate in the garden. I remember going to a pottery class at school and making myself a clay microphone, which I used to run around the garden with, slightly delusional. But so it was that which kind of started it. But then really for a long time, I was really involved in news journalism. And I actually think that's a purer form of journalism, because you are kind of, you are trying to get to the truth in, there's with football, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of the apparatus of football involving the games, and also this press conferences before the game, after the game, which is just really kind of propaganda, really. But so much of the actual writing of football and reporting of it is all built around that kind of structure which the clubs create. Whereas news, you just have, if you're going to get good news stories, you just got to go out and find them, you know.
Yeah.
So I ended up having started thinking I wanted to get into sports, spent a long time on news, and then, you know, ultimately then did move back into writing about sport, but to try to keep a bit of the news component with it, really. And I think, you know, there's so many aspects of it. You know, you kind of so many interviews that happen in you know, the sports interview. So often it's just self-serving. It's just people telling you how great they are.
Yeah.
So I think the news thing, that's why it means so much to me, really, doing the actual reporting.
Yeah, and it comes across in your writing too. It's so grounded, like I mentioned earlier. I got to read a bunch of your pieces. It's just, you know, you're almost like puff pieces, not you as well, getting like puff pieces. You're never going to get the real answer. You know, let's get the real answer. And the craziest thing, and I say this all the time, the sports news cycle moves just as fast as the news cycle, if not faster. I saw you went to the Women's World Cup as well. How was that down? Obviously, we could talk about what happened with Spain and Rubiales.
Yeah.
But what was that like to go see that spectacle down in Australia?
Yeah, great. I mean, just fantastic. I think what was really sweet about what I covered the knockout stages, not the group stage. But I think what was really good, even covering that limited bit, was to see, you know, new nations coming through to talk to, and to actually find in mixed zones after games, you know, Nigeria, Colombia, these kind of teams, Jamaica, you know, with players who are just so pleased to be taking another step up the ladder towards being a recognised women's football nation, that they want to talk about the experience, they want to talk about the challenges that still exist. And because that's, you know, quite often it can be all this mixed zone stuff, you know, people they just give you, like, you got like 3 minutes of tape recorded chat saying nothing really fundamentally. And I would say, if something in many ways, the England team are kind of morphing into a bit like what the men's scene is like, which is that they don't say a lot, which is that access is really controlled and restricted. I think that's probably a product of them. Well, it's a product of them all being so media trained, but it's also a product of them winning the Euros last summer, and they've suddenly become big property. But I mean, as that happens, you feel like they're going away from you. You know, it's all part of that slightly confected sports journalism thing now. Or when you got 5.3 minutes with Mary Earps or whatever, and you just have a chat with that person across a training ground fence or whatever. So, however, overall, great to see the levels of, you know, the places that women's football are really flourishing in. You know, the Jamaicans and the Nigerians. Wow, what a great experience in that mixed zone. So that was particularly good for me, I thought.
Yeah, great support too, and even England travels well for support too. And I know the US traveled really well. The US got knocked out rather early.
Yeah.
It's just
I think the US and that. I mean, I think it's just everything cyclical, isn't it? I mean, you know, they dominate for so long. There's always a fall after a rise. You know, I think, and they'll come back, and you know, Manchester United will come back, Everton will come back. Things happen, but United in the UK game, it's taking a hell of a long time. But certainly that will be interesting to see how the US women's team evolved, purely because what's fascinating to me is just the kind of the level of, you know, just the status of the women's game in the US, because of the way that it's been significant and important part of the landscape for so long.
And actually the club football in the US is really coming on, WSL, things like that. They're really, like, a lot of, for lack of a word, celebrities are getting involved and getting their teams in, and, you know, I think it's kind of really cool to see, and it's definitely evolving into something people want to go see the games, which is great. And I love watching it too. It's on all the time. I love to watch it. I mean, we'd be remiss to not talk about Spain and what happened with Rubiales. Just want to give your take on that as well. It's obviously an unfortunate incident.
Yeah, I just think it was. I mean, it was obviously it completely tainted what the Spanish team had done, really, which was to win a World Cup whilst, you know, really in a position, you know, in opposition to Jorge Vilda, the actual the manager. I mean, that was incredible. You know, they kind of really won it without a manager, essentially, and the kind of doubling down from him, and, or, you know, the fact that story really ran for 2 weeks before he'd actually just walked away. I don't know. I don't know what that says about, whether it says something about a kind of, a kind of a something at the top of Spanish football, about a kind of a sense of just the lack of progressive thought or the lack of modernity about that. I mean, British football's been through that. The women's game in England had been through that. There was a particularly desperate episode about 4 or 5 years ago where a manager was, the England women's manager Mark Sampson, was sacked for alleged sort of racist kind of banter towards one or two of the players, and the FA came out and tried to defend themselves before a UK parliamentary select committee. The FA kind of chairman at that time, a guy called Greg Clark, who just made an absolute idiot of himself before the MPs in testimony, which was televised. So, and that told you that, the FA was kind of written through with old-fashioned, pretty desperate people, really. What a terrible kind of culture, in a sense. And that was a catalyst for something new, and new people came in, and the women's game has flourished as a result of it. So whether Spain is just where England was 5 years ago, who knows? But it was just incredible that it went on for so long.
Yeah, you mentioned the double down at Defiance. It's like, okay, the truth is right there. It's obvious, but even his mother getting involved, things like that, it's unfortunate. And obviously with the men's national team, England national team, they have a really one of the best teams, in my opinion, in a long time. I don't feel like they have the right manager in place, but I don't know. I'm sure you covered a lot. Southgate, I'm not the biggest fan of Southgate. But,
yeah, well, I think I've seen a lot of really, I've seen a lot of dark days for the England team. I've not actually covered the England's men team that much over the years, but I think Southgate has brought something fresh to it, and something positive to what had always been a rather dour and, I don't know, vexatious world. Certainly as a journalist looking in, he's made it a far more positive place. He's taken England to a World Cup semi-final, to a Euros final. I just sometimes think, we're a small nation, and it's easy to get complacent about exactly what he's delivered. But he's got some immense talent, and Jude Bellingham clearly is on another level to all of those who've come before in recent years. And there are some really clever, talented players who, there's got to be real hope for England in the next Euros, in 2024.
Well, even in the past, they try to shoehorn like Lampard and Gerrard in the midfield. It doesn't quite work, and hopefully the balance still does come together, and they could put it. Yeah. They could put it together for sure. And as far as like going on, your journalism, what are some of your great highlights? I did see that you worked on a piece with Gareth Bale. Is that correct? I saw that. Gareth Bale. Yeah,
that was a bit one of those sort of sit down sponsored interviews. So it was okay. It was all right. I mean, I thought Gareth was quite polite, but I think by then he was kind of sick of football. I mean, I think probably the highlights for me really have been, the traveling has been immense. I mean, I spent a lot of time in Japan covering the Olympics and the Paralympics. That was the pandemic Olympics, so it was a very weird one to cover, but I loved it. I loved Japan. I thought it was just beautiful, immense, really good. I suppose the one that's meant a lot to me in the last few years has been, because of the Daily Mail's willingness to invest in me as a journalist and in journalism generally, I was able to go to Nepal to actually investigate the story of the families of young men who died whilst building the World Stadium, the World Cup stadia in Qatar. That was obviously a story that ran for a long time about the human rights. So we tried to get underneath that and say, well, who are these men who died from Nepal, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, India, and many, many other places? And my colleague Kevin Quigley, photographer, and I were able to get right into the sort of the backwoods of Nepal and outside of Kathmandu, and actually meet some of the families and understand more. That meant so much to me to be able to go and do that, because I wouldn't say it was particularly difficult journalism. It was a practical difficulty to be able to sort of to be supported financially to go there and do that, and to land in a country where there are just kind of really very few roads. Really, it's literally getting from A to B, which is a challenge.
Yeah.
And that was like taking you into something outside of your own reality. And it grieves me that nothing really ever happened. There was never any adequate compensation from the Qataris.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we covered the World Cup, there was just such chauvinism from the Qatari state to those people. I mean, the immigrant population really, who were almost kind of slaves, really, just running the World Cup for Qatar and making it work. And I thought Qatar got away with that, really. But they would think they probably had. But anyway, it sounds like a slightly grim one to mention, Josh, but that was the one in recent years I feel was a really important one, and it meant a lot to do it.
Yeah, that's definitely an important topic. And for me, look, I was like, there's no way they're going to have the World Cup there. There's just no way it's going to happen. And it does happen, in the winter, and all the controversy went around it. So very shocking that it still went on. Even everyone knew it's like, this is not on the up and up, and people died, unfortunately, and just horrible, horrible experience. I'm sure, and what a great, journalism to go out there and check it out. And, shifting, it's like, talking about world football, Saudi Arabia has now come into play now, and a lot of very talented professionals are going down there. Do you think it's taking away from the game at all?
I don't think it is yet. I mean, I think at the moment we're still really seeing just kind of older players, I think, going there. I think when it starts to become more of a worry is if they do start to take, well, I say worry, where I think it starts to affect the game, as you say, is when more players in their prime will leave. And I was really worried about the idea of Mo Salah leaving, because that would be, albeit that Salah is over 30, that would have robbed Liverpool FC of an opportunity to compete with Manchester City. I think City, I actually see Liverpool as a way of maintaining a competitive balance in the Premier League. We need teams who can challenge City. And I think if Saudis had taken him away, we would then have had, the Middle East throwing billions at Manchester City to make them, so much better than everybody else. But then also the Middle East also taking away one of the key tools of the one side who can challenge them. And I do think one of the problems for British football and English football, I should say, is that it just becomes the Man City show.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen. And the money didn't talk, even though it was kind of crazy money. But that is there, isn't it? I just think it's a question. We don't know. There's uncertainties in the way that they were in China for a while. Looked like they were going to become, it was going to become the new football landscape because of the money they were throwing. I think that didn't really work. Mm-hmm. I think what's different between Saudi and China is that there is obviously a football culture there already. There is a really crazy support for the Saudi clubs, the Riyadh clubs, for example. So it's a threat, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, to take away that talent, like Ronaldo going, and even Salah. I thought he was going to go. I was like, oh, he's going to go, and
for sure. Yeah.
I mean, because at his age, 30, 31, you would think like, okay, he'll go, and maybe they'll wait, till January and replace him. But I'm glad he did stay, and I do agree with you. Liverpool and even Arsenal to a point, at Tottenham this year, will challenge or take points off, but it's at this point City's to lose. It pains me to say, as a United fan, but moving forward, I know you obviously were a journalist for a while. You got into writing books. How did you do that? Something you want to be an author as well, or just come with a natural progression for you?
I don't necessarily want to just be an author. I just think I'll always like writing long form stuff. And I sort of came into company with a guy called David Luxton, who's a sort of a literary agent, if you like. So it's a very fancy way of, I wouldn't describe myself as literary, but we talked about ideas of like ways of expanding out what I was doing for the Independent into sort of, what might be worth more than a feature, might actually be a really extended piece of work. And so that's how that happened. And it did seem a natural extension. And when it came to writing about Wrexham, I mean, that would be, because that's my hometown, and I'd seen the club really since the late 70s through their ups and downs. And, that just seemed to be David said to me that just seems to be why not? Why wouldn't you consider trying to write a book about that? And then Headline, who are the publishers, and a number of others were really responsive to that, and they really saw the value in that. So it was a kind of a natural extension, I think.
And talking about Wrexham, and obviously it's a great story. What the last 15, 16, 17 years, what has the town been through? Because it's great to see everything on the pitch but what was the town like with in regards to optimism and the people? Obviously there's a change. What has it been through in the last 15 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think like an awful lot of towns, in slightly out of the way places, it's been quite a struggle. It's quite a struggle for identity in a place like that, which I've tried to kind of get across in the book. Because it's not it's just over the border into England. It's got Chester, which is this kind of very sort of quite affluent city on the tourist trail, which a lot of Americans will be aware of. That's part of the Edinburgh, York, London, Windsor. That's that kind of circuit. And even within Wales, a lot of the money tends to go to the South Wales cities, Cardiff and Swansea, Cardiff being the capital, obviously. So it's kind of a little bit, slightly out on its own in some respects. But it's just got brilliant people, doing like all towns, really, just making things work, just fighting for it, campaigning for it, politicians, Labour, Leslie Griffiths, the Welsh MP, Plaid Cymru, Mark Jones, and Plaid Cymru is the Welsh the Welsh Independence Party. I think you probably put it that way. Mark Jones, local businesses, and these are the people who are the lifeblood of any town in the US, Canada, UK. So they've kind of and towns need people like that. I could mention many more, that I've come across for the book and found, and fallen into company with and come to know. So, so they've, these are the heartbeat of towns, I think, in many ways. But it has been a struggle, and there was a lot of talk under the Conservative government in the UK of a levelling up process, that all of the money that was being funneled into London, and that it would be more spread out, and this was their way of kind of maintaining some of the vote that they secured at the last election outside of London. But I mean, levelling up just never really came, So places have had to stand on their own 2 feet and just do it themselves. Although I would say that one of the advantages of being in Wales is that you do have the Labour-dominated or the Labour-led Welsh Assembly, which has provided some of the kind of support for a place like ours that Westminster, just despite bizarrely having a Conservative MP, Sarah Atherton, Cardiff has actually provided some support there and helped the place to evolve.
I actually got a chance to talk to Wayne Jones in San Diego about the turf. He was telling me a story, and he mentioned some of the same things about just putting back into the town. It seems there's been life put back into the town. And as I read the forward to your book, and I'm not here in the States yet, but I saw there's a great picture of you and your dad, your mom, your brother. I thought that was a great photo. Going to the games when you're younger in Wrexham, I'm sure it has a big impact on why you wrote the book. Is that something that?
100%, Josh. Yeah, definitely. And I think that was a big FA Cup game against West Ham, a big London team who I think probably were in the first division, the top flight at that time. So, and for quite a lot of time in the 90s, Wrexham were a great giant killing team. I don't know if you in the US that's kind of got that terminology still applies, but I suppose it's kind of self-explaining really. And I think that was almost a kind of a metaphor for our little town. We might not have an abundant amount of wealth, but we were able to go and through an indomitable kind of spirit and determination and resolve and pride in what we represented, beat big teams. I mean, there was a legendary win over Arsenal in 1992, who had been champions of England the previous year. We seemed to beat West Ham almost every season. We got to the quarterfinals of the FA Cup one season. We did far more than a club of our size ought to have done. So, but yeah, I think that's I suppose that's what brings my country and your country together, I suppose, and us together as fans, is that, you know, those experiences are just, you know, they just kind of burn it on your soul, aren't they? Really burn it on your soul. They're part of what you are, and that's why suddenly to have a broader audience for Wrexham, that's why I wanted to write the book.
Mm-hmm. And you know, the book for me, it's like, you know, like you said, drawing attention to the people of the States. And I mentioned earlier, we were talking before, I was at the San Diego game and versus Manchester United. There's so many Wrexham fans there, and the support is really positive. And hopefully, you know, it can continue. Where do you think, as far as like Ryan and Rob coming in, where do you think they can take this club? Is the sky the limit? What are your thoughts? Obviously, they're getting their feet under them now in League Two, which is great.
I think there's a lot. I think that the business model's really. I mean, by the way, just on that last point about community, what I really hope I can do for an American audience is to actually say, well, this is the town behind the place you see on Welcome to Wrexham. I wanted to make that point. I just really hope I've captured enough of it for people to understand more about the place and want to come to visit the place. But as far as how far they can go, I think there's a really interesting and a unique, an original kind of business model here, where really Rob and Ryan are the club's prime commodity, you know, commercial commodity, not the striker, not the goalkeeper, not the captain, not the great midfielder, but because of them being there at the centre and at the core of it, they've shown how they can bring in big sponsors, you know, who want the association not with the Welcome to Wrexham documentary, but with that, you know, that week to week narrative that Rob and Ryan tell through their social media, you know, about themselves and the club, and that's, I think, what's really smart. I'm going to get to the point in a minute, by the way. That's what's really smart about them. It's not just something which is kind of on our radar for the, you know, 6 weeks a year when the actual documentary's on, but they keep it going throughout, really. So because that brings in the kind of sponsors that other clubs just don't really expect to have, I think that they will bring in revenue and they will continue to be able to buy players who can help them to kind of flourish. And I think this season's a good example. You know, they got promoted. Since getting promotion, they've got a striker called Stephen Fletcher. They've got a brilliant left back, James McLean, just to name two. Will Boyle at centre half. And that means they can be very competitive. So they can certainly get to the Championship, I think, with this model. I don't see why not. Mm-hmm. When you start to get thinking about promotion from Championship to Premier League, that's when you get into the really lunatic money, you know, and clubs and owners who've just just thrown away millions in a failed attempt. So I think that's where you start to think, well, do they need to get other private equity in? You know, how you know, can even their, you know, incredible reach really help them to reach a level where they're going to be competing against, you know, Gulf state sovereign wealth funds, basically. Right. So I would say Championship is a great aspiration, and I don't even know that I particularly want Wrexham to be in the Premier League, because I think the trouble with clubs who get into Premier League is that they're no longer a representative of community. They're just kind of parts of a global league, you know. The soul goes. I mean, I suppose Luton would disagree, or Burnley would disagree, and I think they are very soulful clubs. But I know Man City have got lots of fans, and Liverpool from their community. But it just seems to be a kind of a commercial machine up there, really.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about Rob and Ryan bringing in, you know, commercial supporters. Sorry, bringing in money to the club. You know. Rob McElhenney is probably one of the hardest working guys in in Hollywood. He put his show together with his friends and like grafted his way up to being like what it is now. And you could see it's evident that they do care. And, you know, moving up to the league, up in the leagues, you know, even when they didn't get promoted, when they expected to, it's like, okay, they went right back and they did it again. And I think that's indicative of how they're doing with the club and hopefully with the town as well. And, you know, for me, if they get into the Championship, I think that's one of the toughest leagues in British football.
Yeah,
they might.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to be complacent. That's a throwaway comment. Oh, we can get to the Championship, but that would be astonishing.
Right.
But yeah, I agree. I think they do really get community, and they do get football's place in community. And I've got to mention a guy who I met a few times in the process of writing the book, called Steve Horowitz, who from Inner Circle Sports in New York, Lexington Avenue, New York, a great kind of finance house who've helped to bring together American owners and British clubs. And Steve just so innately understands British football, and I'm sure, I think he's been an important part of helping Rob and Ryan to understand, that in a sense the club is theirs, but it's not theirs. They're just kind of custodians. It's the community's club, and that's, they've been very good at getting that from day one.
Yeah, and I think Rob always says, like, we know nothing about football. Parkinson, the rest of the team, the rest of the club, like, put it in their hands and they know what they're doing. I think that's really, really great. Just a transparency, even though they still want to win. And Parkinson's fantastic. I think he's doing a great job, and hopefully they can continue to, with every game, I watch every game, they get everyone's best hit. So hopefully they can, get their feet under them and continue to move forward.
Really hope so. Yeah.
And obviously, congratulations on the book, Tinseltown. And what's next for you? Obviously, you write every week for the Mail. What's next for you?
I don't know. I mean, I think the process of writing books is just so good. It's just a lovely thing to do, and but it's. I mean, my day job is certainly as a journalist for the Daily Mail, Mail on Sunday, and their kind of their digital platforms. There's a thing called Mail Plus that they do, which is a really, really cool. It's a premium kind of site, if you like, and it's not free, but it's a really cool way of actually seeing your stuff presented digitally. So there's a lot of work there, which my editors are looking at to try and build our audiences and build new audiences. So that's my job. So, but if I felt that there was something, and David, my agent, felt there was something that we could do that was interesting and there was an audience for, then I'd love to do more of that. I'd love to do it. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And I've been reading, and I will continue to keep reading and watching Wrexham. And I don't want to take too much of your time, but I really appreciate you coming on the show. Hopefully we can have you back.
Yeah, I'd love to. It's been a really nice chat. It's so interesting. I've not spent an awful lot of time in the US, but I did. My only extended visit was about a month in the sort of the mid 90s, and what really struck me about, if I could generalize about the US, was just the real respect for and interest in journalism as a field of kind of professional importance, and I was interested, just it's great to be able to talk to you about that journalism and all that, because I think there's a little bit of a cynicism for journalism in the UK. I think that's possibly bred by the tabloid kind of culture and a lot of the tabloid stuff activity that's not been so good, in the last, which has come to light in the last 10, 20 years. And even in the process of writing the book, I sort of found that I spoke to a bunch of guys, of your compatriots, and Steve, I remember saying, like, I want to give you as much time as I can because I want you to do the best possible job you can. So just that American respect for journalistic endeavor is something which really struck me from the start. So if that doesn't sound too pretentious, that's really cool. And it'd be great to talk more.
No, it shows that you care, and I think that's what comes through in your writing and what in the book as well. And I'm sure everyone will embrace it the same. And I forgot to ask, so I was going to let you go. Have you met Rob and Ryan? I didn't. Were they involved in the book?
No, I haven't. They weren't. I didn't interview them for the book. That wasn't something that was possible from their side. I met them very sort of, in terms of the closest I came to meet them was a press conference that they held at the racecourse just after they'd taken over. It was on their first trip to the UK when and it was still sort of the latter days of pandemic. So the press conference was in the Macron stand, as we call it. And so I was able to put a couple of questions, and I mean, they were on very good form, of course, and there were a lot of great one-liners. I
think it made the show.
And it was one of the best presses. I mean, it was they had their message to deliver, and they certainly delivered it, but with a lot of brio, So I did see Ryan on Saturday, 20 yards away up in the Betty Buzz suite, as they call it now, where they wait before during the game against Grimsby. So it would be cool to meet him one day properly, but they seem like very good guys.
By the way, the race course is rocking. Like this past weekend against Grimsby, it was nuts. I can't wait till the cop gets in there. Unfortunately, they just came out that not going to be ready for the 24-25 season, so it's going to be a little delayed. But that place is rocking.
Yeah, no, it is really rocking. It really is. So even though you've got one empty end, it's cool. It really is. Yeah.
It's great to see. It's great how we talk about we mentioned some of the negativities in football. I think the story of Wrexham, the book you wrote, and what you guys are doing in Wrexham and the passion, I think that's what draws myself and the rest of the world to it. And I hope it continues. And I'm going to be a part of it. You don't switch clubs. I am a Manchester United fan, but I love watching what Wrexham is doing, and I'm going to continue to do it. And talking to guys like you is fantastic. So
that's great. Well, I mean, I'd just say that the book's kind of kind of actually physical book is around. I think is around in the US from January, available in the US from January. Of course, it's buyable on. It doesn't sound like a hard sell. It sounds buyable online, and there's an outfit called Blackwell's who've got quite a well-known bookshop in Oxford and other university cities, and I think they do free international shipping. But it'll be great to sort of to know that it'll be on sale in the US in January, and maybe we could talk again then or something.
I was about to say, let's have you on again. I'd love to.
Oh yeah, that'd be good.
Be fantastic. So thank you for your time, Mr. Ian Herbert.
Cool. Thank you.